Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Blood, Dust and Snow, Chapter 4. June 24th, 1941. With our tanks, we are standing a few hundred meters in front of WWII, waiting for our deployment. In the morning, Russian tanks broke through and they had reached the southern exit of the village behind which we are now standing. A short while ago, we were being shelled by Red artillery and had to fan out in the field to our right. The wind is carrying clouds of fine white dust towards us, which is thrown up by the vehicles of the baggage train driving down the road. By now, we all look like flour millers, our black uniforms completely covered with dust. We wouldn't mind that if we could only advance again. Our first Abteilung suffered casualties. The second company was entirely surprised by much stronger Russian forces. Lieutenant Bock and Lieutenant Kasten are dead. Hauptmann Burgstaller is badly wounded. The CO of 1st Company, Oberleutnant Höhr, was wounded and is expected to die. The furthermost line is supposed to be about 4 kilometers in front of the village of WWII, but we lost a bridgehead across the Dubisa. The infantrymen here are not from northern Germany, it'll have to be seen how they perform. The infantry with which we drove into our first attack were really good and attacked like Blücher playing with tin soldiers. Heavy artillery is standing behind us and is sending one 15cm shell after another towards the Russians. We can hear the heavy shells howling over our heads. Most of the Russians here are tough fighters, especially the Asians whom the Russians have thrown into the battle here. We saw that when we encountered the Mongols in the trench between the second bunker line and those who let themselves be killed by Leonhard 7.5cm instead of surrendering. I witnessed another case at Stegvillai. For 2 hours our tanks had been standing there surrounded by our infantry. Nearby there were batteries of our artillery and the roads were full of our vehicles. Then, suddenly, about 20 meters away from a Panzer II, a lone Russian soldier rises up from the tall grain and throws a hand grenade on the tank. When that bounces off the tank's side and detonates on the ground, the Russian takes aim with his rifle and fires on the tank's commander. The bullet went through his shirt collar and only grazed his skin. Wham! For a moment there my pencil slipped when something exploded in the field behind us, but never mind. 500 meters behind, a heavy artillery battery keeps up a relentless fire. And among all the noise, I can't help to notice that several small blue butterflies keep circling around my tank. June 26, 1941. This is an unbound fragment of text on loose pages inserted here. During the night from June 25th to June 26th, the Russian attempts to break through our position on Hill 126. In the forest west of Bagno-i-Gossili, we tankers and the riflemen had him surrounded and now he tried to escape towards the north. But he didn't manage to achieve this and had to withdraw into the forest with heavy casualties. The many lorries they left behind on the roadside all went up in flames and thus, like torches, illuminated the path we would take during our counter-thrust, which my men would have to launch at dawn. A brief meeting of the leaders in front of the vanguard of riflemen and then the attack is rolling. Across Svegiai, towards the village in front of it, through the forest behind it, towards Hill 141, where we are to link up with the element of the 1st Panzer Division. In the meantime, we get to look at an enemy tank. The hull of this specific tank with the tracks is about 4 meters wide. Each track on its own is nearly 75 centimeters wide. The whole thing is camouflaged in green and up to the turret ring is over 2 meters high. At first sight, it has quite a comical look about it, in stark contrast to all the thought which went into the design of our own tanks. All its armor is strictly vertical and the entire tank is so awkwardly set up that it looks like a huge box on caterpillars, a shithouse on tracks. But we have learned that these boxes need to be taken very seriously, as even 5cm anti-tank guns and 7.5cm tank guns fail to have any effect on them, but one must just stay calm. In front of the forest there's lots of heavy activity. The commander of the lead tank climbs out of his vehicle and sprints towards the forest. At the same time, I see how his Panzer IV is carefully rolling backwards. Damn, what is going on there? There is no shooting to be heard, but the entire advance has halted. Via the radio, I ask the commander of the lead tank, who has just returned, what is going on. There's a huge tank standing in the clearing, is the reply. I tell him to take a fuel can to the enemy tank and set it on fire, but he isn't keen to do it himself. I open the turret hatch and dismount, shoving the pistol into one trouser pocket and a few egg grenades into the other, and then sprint towards the clearing. There is an enormous Russian tank there, and its 15cm gun barrel is pointed menacingly on our small Skoda tanks, which look like dwarfs compared to that giant. My heart starts pounding against my chest. This is probably what a hunter feels like when he is suddenly facing an elephant. It is standing about 30 meters away, and up until now it has neither fired nor moved. It's just standing there. An eerie silence hangs over the clearing. A few riflemen make a jump towards the Russian tank, so I sprint towards it as well. In the corner of my eye, I suddenly see a Russian infantryman rising from a foxhole, but before he can do anything, he's hit by a burst from a machine pistol and collapses. One of the riflemen climbs onto the Russian tank, ignites a stick grenade and pushes it into the barrel of the 15cm gun. There is a muffled sound of a detonation, and fragments of the grenade fly out the front of the barrel. And suddenly there is movement inside the tank. I am standing so close to it that I can hear the voices of the crew inside and an odd clanking metallic sound. I want to climb up the tank myself, but it is damn high to climb up from the rear, so one of the riflemen is helping me to get up. I am standing right behind the turret when the crew suddenly starts to traverse it. They are taking aim on a Panzer IV. On the rear of the turret there are two holes from which two plugs are hanging from wire cables. I use my pistol and fire 2 shots into each of the holes before, as quick as I can, I climb in front of the turret, fish a grenade out of my pocket, ignite it and chuck it into the gun barrel. All that is happening in seconds. At the same moment I can hear the metallic clanking noise again. It must be the sound of someone opening and closing the gun breech. The grenade fails to roll through. There must be some kind of blockage to cause a barrel burst, so I roll my second grenade down the barrel. Again, there is a muffled detonation and there is smoke coming out of the 2 viewing mirrors of the turret front. Hurrah! That one must have hurt the crew. But there is still movement inside the turret. I think to myself that there must be another way to finish the brothers off, so I climb onto the turret using the 2 rungs welded to its side. In addition to the 2 protective covers for the optics, there is a flat turret hatch. But that is properly shut and doesn't move, and while I am fiddling at the hatch, the crew suddenly traverse the turret again. For a second I can't help smiling. Usually, if one wants to roll forward, one slowly accelerates a Panzer IV, but suddenly our good old 7.5cm gun vehicle, seeing that the mighty 15cm gun is taking aim at it, makes a jump forward as if the driver had accelerated in 4th gear while being chased by the devil himself. And quite weirdly, while being traversed with the turret as if on a carousel, I have to think about my time as a recruit when we were first introduced to the Panzer IV and all climbed onto the turret to be turned around on it. The little DKW engine did that very nicely. An odd thought in a situation like this, but it only lasts a second. I jump off the turret onto the hull. There is a cover on the top of the cylindrical mount of the gun, and I ram another grenade into the gap between the two. Bang! The thing explodes and takes the metal cover with it. I take a look at it and realize that there's a slit there, probably to allow ventilation of the fighting compartment. A rifleman hands me a stick grenade, but that doesn't fit through the gap, so I place it on top instead and pull the igniter before hurrying into cover behind the turret. With a bang it detonates, and I suddenly notice that someone is pulling up the plugs on the metal wires with the intention of closing the holes through which I fired moments ago. I fire another round through the hole and the plugs fall down. But while I am doing so, I don't realize that my head is right in front of the other hole. One of the riflemen on the ground shouts, "Careful! Watch out, Herr Leutnant!" And while I am turning around, there is an ear-deafening bang and a bullet whizzes past my ear. I am not hurt. What a tremendous amount of luck. I jump off the tank and ask a Feldwebel of the rifleman for a few cartridges for my pistol. While I am loading my magazine, I see Feldwebel Oswald running across the clearing towards the mammoth tank with a fuel can in his hand. I shout over to him, "That's how to do it!" And at the same moment he throws the opened can onto the tank's engine deck. The fuel runs into the grid protecting the air ventilation system, and everyone waits until enough of it has run into the tank. Then Oswald throws a hand grenade on it. It bursts and a jet of flame shoots up. Hurrah! The tank is burning. I have just started to look for my own tank, the good Skoda Supersport, when all of a sudden the turret hatch of the giant tank lifts and a Red Army soldier starts climbing out. As he isn't lifting his hands and is showing no intentions to surrender, the riflemen shoot him dead. His body falls from the turret onto the earth below. Well, that has cost us more than enough time. I climb back into my tank, we start rolling, and my radio operator signals that I can use the radio. I order my platoon to continue the advance and designate their next objective. Looking through my binoculars, I have identified a Russian 3.7 cm flak battery on the hill ahead, and now we are charging it hell for leather. We are leaving our riflemen behind, they will have to catch up with us later. The Russian gun crews, however, have already made a run for it. The foxholes around the flak guns are filled with equipment and weapons. There are still some Russians in a house to the right, but before we can even get there, some Kratzschützen, which is motorized infantry, come up and shoot 2 Reds with their pistols and then throw hand grenades through the windows. Everyone who is not already dead is burning to death now, as the wooden house with its straw roof is catching fire immediately. Via the radio, I order my men not to fire on the flak guns, they are worth a lot of money, and then the advance continues on the right side of the road past Taftuce. But what is that? Fahrer halt! Driver stop. Through the binoculars I can see a tank. Turret at 10 o'clock, 400 meters on the right of a cluster of houses, a Christie tank. Turning the turret, I shout, "Armor-piercing shell," and take aim through the optics. The loader shouts, "Ready!" and wham! The shell leaves the barrel. With the binoculars, I observe through the lower turret hatch. Good, that one hit the turret. Another armor-piercing. "Ready?" Erdmann, my loader, replies, "Ready!" That one hits the hull at the rear, right into the engine, and it starts burning. The advance continues, there is marshland on the right, so I warn the platoon via the radio. On the hill ahead, I can see vehicles of the 1st Panzer Division. I fire a white signal flare, our Skodas are easily mistaken for Russian armor. I fire a second white signal flare, and then we roll onto a hedgerow about 100 meters ahead. Theo Sander, my namesake, suddenly shouts, "There's another one of those heavy Russians over there." And truly, just ahead, there is a T-28, a giant tank with 3 turrets. It's easy to identify. Armor-piercing, ready! Wham! Right into the turret. Another into the rear of the hull, and it starts smoking, and a third one for good measure. Faces blackened by powder fumes and uniforms coated with dust, we arrive on Hill 141. Lots of excitement and joy on both sides, the pincers have closed, and the Russians are trapped. I report our position to the commander and the tanks of the 1st Panzer Division, and then radio back to the company to make my report. There is time to survey the battlefield. On the right, there is a Russian 15 cm artillery piece of the latest design, and there is also a flamethrower tank which is burning brightly. A few deep gulps from our canteens, the Lithuanian heat makes the tongue stick to the palate. It has really been worth it. In the evening, the boss treats each tank crew to a bottle of champagne. June 27th, 1941. 0300. My last sentence was supposed to continue, just like the larks in the sky above us, whose songs we can hear whenever the artillery is not firing. Now, in the cool morning air, the larks are singing again. I hope the cool temperature will help me to overcome my tiredness. We are standing on Hill 132 near Jagiellonien, while the whole of the 6th Panzer Division is rolling past us. It seems that after having formed the spearhead of the advance since WWII, we are now being granted some rest. But even if that is badly needed, there is no one in the company who wouldn't rush to spearhead the advance through the whole of Russia if our Oberst Koll asked us to do so. Now that there is some time, I will try to describe the fighting in the previous 3 days. I just didn't have the time to do so earlier. The last time I tried was when we were suddenly taken under fire by Russian artillery. In the afternoon, we were shifted forward to the left of the 1st Abteilung, which was positioned on Hill 123 behind WWII. Together with the 5th Company, we were to form a firing front to repel an ongoing enemy tank attack. Ready for battle. Quick radio check while moving off, which was working fine, and then full speed through the burning town. A petrol can falls off the tank in front of us and spills its contents into the street between the burning buildings. We were lucky that our tank didn't catch fire. There are rumbling crashes of explosions all around. It's kind of fun. Inside the tank, one doesn't panic too quickly, and we are used to those sounds anyway. What exactly is happening is hard to judge during the approach. In a garden on the left side of the road, a lieutenant of the artillery lies in the grass, his face covered with blood. His head turns toward us as we rumble past him, so he isn't dead yet. We continue to the reverse slope position on the hill, where the artillery is locked in heavy fighting with the enemy. On the right side of the hill in particular, one salvo after another slams into the ground. One can't see where the fire is coming from. We platoon leaders are called to the boss, who explains that he wants our company to stop the ongoing enemy advance and to launch a counterattack towards the Dubiza crossing. We move into a firing position on top of the hill and spot a tank which is slowly driving left to right along the forest edge at a distance of about 1,200 meters. Then it turns towards us. The artillery throws volley after volley towards the other side, and now and then there is cheering and applause among us. Bullseye. That was right on target. Damn, missed it, or the like. The Russian tank, however, unfazed by the shells detonating around it, continues to advance slowly and calmly. Next to a barn on the edge of the forest, we identified another large tank which didn't move. Those things which the Russians have on the roll there seem to be quite enormous. The moving tank then suddenly turns and disappears into the forest on the horizon. Then, suddenly, a shout over the wireless. Enemy tank from the left! We take a look through the binoculars and identify yet another of those flat giants prowling through the terrain, heading towards the road on which Kampfgruppe Raus was supposed to arrive to assist us. The artillerymen throw their guns around. Sharpish work, one has to admire the speed with which they manhandle their heavy 105s. They order a few of our tanks out of their line of fire and then open up. Again, the shells fall very close to the target. The Lancers cheer after every near miss, but just like his comrade at the forest edge, the huge tank rolls on undeterred. Then it disappears behind a house about 1,500 meters away. Everyone is anxiously waiting for it to reappear. After about 3 minutes, the beast rolls on and the 105s continue to fire. Major Zollenkopf is watching the show whilst standing next to my tank. I ask him if it wouldn't be better to let those things get a bit closer. And indeed, the artillery is suddenly ordered to cease firing, but the Russian tank seems to have had enough and turns away to the right. A few minutes later, several Kübelwagen drive up the street towards us, the leaders of Kampfgruppe Raus, their vehicles following behind them. And then finally, we deploy to counterattack. Driver, forward march. A long drive to the burning barn ahead, carrying the riflemen along with us. A few shots into the mammoth tank, which suddenly starts to burn. Then a few shots into an armored target on our hard right, not visible to our driver, and effects thus unobserved. The 7th Company is getting in our way. We drive around the edge of the forest to where the Russian field kitchens are. The infantry is only a few meters ahead of us when suddenly, on the left of our tank, a Russian stands up. The swine had pretended to be dead when our infantry came past him. That's an old classic, pretending to be dead and then firing from the rear. But that isn't a good idea when facing tankmen like us. Driver, floor the accelerator, turn left and run him over. Problem solved. That man won't hurt anyone anymore. At that moment, there were only machine gun targets ahead of us, Russian infantry which crawled back into their trenches at our approach. The trenches zigzag into the undergrowth of the woods. And again, not a single one of them surrenders. Not a single Russian walks towards us with arms raised. Why is that? I even have learned how to say nicely "Ruki Werch," but they have probably been scared by their commissars. But we can't debate with the soldiers of the Red Army. Instead, we just gun them down and then forward, just forward. Our turret hatch is nearly fully closed, only leaving a small open gap just to make sure that no one can throw a hand grenade inside. In the forest aisle to our right stand 2 enemy tanks which I have overlooked because I was in the lead and driving fast to aid the progress of the infantry. Oberfeldwebel Oswald and Unteroffizier Hünecker, however, fired on both but drove on without waiting to observe the effect of their fire. We were advancing when suddenly there was a very hard, metallic and frightening bang. At the same moment I feel a sharp pain in the back of my head. For a moment my vision blacks out and then turns red. I try to find out what has happened to my skull. Above me, a little bit of the edge of the turret hatch is missing, the observation mirror is smashed, the leather padding on the inside of the hatch torn, and there is a hole in the light signal apparatus in the turret. Tiny metal splinters cover the breech of the gun, and the rest of the turret is strewn with fragments of leather and similar splinters. I ask Erdweg to tell me what's wrong with my head, which is hurting a lot. I feel the back of my skull and there's blood on my fingers. Everything seems to be alright, however, as otherwise there would be more blood. Erdweg confirms that there are only a few small scratches in the skin. Lucky me. One of my first thoughts after being hit is about making sure that we all stay inside the tank. Stay calm. Is there a fire somewhere? If so, put it out with the extinguisher. But there is no fire, and Theo is already driving on. Through the small gap under the turret hatch, I search the surrounding area with my binoculars. And there, enemy tank on the left. Turn the turret around. Erdwig, AP shell ready? Erdwig has no clue what's going on, but shouts a reply, Ja! Theo needs to stop. It is loud, so I shout the order. Now I can take aim properly. My sting hits between the hull and turret. Visor 300, ready and fire. Then stand up quickly to observe the effect with the binoculars and down again. The shell has to be ejected manually and Erdwig is not ready yet. Erdwig, faster, faster, faster! Erdwig shouts, ready! And with a bang, the shell leaves the barrel and hits its target a bit further towards the rear where the engine sits. A flash on the other side, just a second long. I observe again through my binoculars and smoke is rising from the engine. Next to the Russian tank, about 300 meters away, stands a German armored half-track of the riflemen. I had withdrawn there to evade the Russian tanks. While I am still watching, it goes up in flames too. I send a radio message to my platoon. Watch for friendly vehicles, only fire on enemy tanks and vehicles. Then I receive the order, hold fire, stay in your position, let the riflemen catch up. In front of us something is going on, but I can't really see anything through the curtain of trees ahead. I open the hatch, which allows me to see the scale of damage on the outside. 2 mirrors gone, the outside of the turret full of small scratches and scars, 3 petrol cans leaking, and the fuel spurting out of the holes. There's a substantial hole in the engine hatch. The shot must have come from behind and from the same anti-tank gun which managed to damage the track of Oswald's tank. He radios in at the same moment to report that it was shot off by anti-tank gun fire from the left. He asks what he is supposed to do, but I have my own face smashed in, so what am I to tell him? Repair the damage if possible and drive on. If not, stay where you are. I then jump off my tank to remove the shot-up petrol cans and to sort out the shredded tent squares and coats. After replacing the mirrors, we reversed the tank 50 meters and then took cover in a roadside ditch because the air was full of shells and projectiles fired blindly our way by the withdrawing enemy tanks. Together with some riflemen, we take a look at our surroundings from the safety of our ditch. The Russians had done a lot of damage to the Kampfgruppe of the 1st Abteilung. In the rye field on our right, there stand the remains of one of our 5 cm anti-tank guns. It has been crushed into the ground. Another one stands at the entrance of a homestead in front of our ditch. We can't see any German dead. The tank, which we shot into flames earlier, had now thoroughly started burning and suddenly its ammunition exploded. While I am taking cover, I spot one of my old comrades of the staff, Unteroffizier Karl Butler, whose Panzer II is parked nearby. We greet one another joyfully. I tell him how happy I am that I can finally participate in a war without being condemned to wither away on some other posting. Man, you're bleeding, he said. Get a medic to put some dressing on it. But I am not bothered by it. As long as my head isn't being cut off, it's all not too bad. We continue. We mount up and overtake the advancing riflemen. No sign of the enemy tanks, which seem to have withdrawn behind a hill towards the front. Pedal to the floor, we are going after the Ruskies. I drive on our right wing, the road on which the riflemen are advancing to my right. Along the road, we come across the battered wrecks of the vehicles left behind by our Kratzschützen. They had been among those elements of our troops who had formed the bridgehead across the Dubiza and which had been overrun by several of those mammoth tanks the Russians deployed. They had to flee as quickly as they could. There was nothing they could have done to stop these rolling shithouses. The riflemen rely on our tank company, and if we don't stop during an attack by the Reds, and if we don't stop sacrificing ourselves when necessary, then the riflemen and all the other people don't have an anchor on our line. Our whole front will collapse down to the rearward areas. Every Lancer knows well what that would mean. And during this particular attack, they can clearly see the effects of a panicked retreat. German vehicles everywhere, crushed motorbikes and Kübelwagen which had been run over by the giant Russian tanks, which didn't even have to fire a shot. Crushed like old tins underfoot. Tanks of the second company stand around in the area, abandoned by their crews to be captured by the Russians. Such a scene should never be repeated. The attack rolls forward. My platoon is ahead of the lead elements of the 7th Company. One more quick stop to allow for a final quick look on the map, which I carry in a leather satchel strapped to my chest next to my pistol. The Panje huts forward of the left, that must be Daugodai. The hill behind it must be opposite point 121, and 2 kilometers further forward is the Dubiza. But what is this? A tank is standing on the hill to the left. We approach slowly, halt in front of the line of hedges, and observe the enemy through it. Indeed, a Christie. Load armor piercing. Ready. Fire. And bam! Right on target. Just to make sure it doesn't get to return fire, I fire a second round into it, which hits near the engine deck. By then, several of our tanks have also spotted the Christie and take it under fire. Soon, it is burning brightly. I drive straight across the road between the crushed remains of some armored personnel carriers to take a reverse slope position on the hill on the left. And behold, in the distance at 1 o'clock, 1,200 meters, the forest edge next to the barn frame, there is an enemy tank. I report this to my platoon, who immediately take it under fire. A few Panzer IVs engage the target as well. At this range, they can do that with more chance of success than we can. We haven't got enough ammunition to keep up this firefight. Our remaining AP shells are soon spent. I soon cease firing, because even though every third or fourth shell we fire is on target, I can see them ricocheting into the sky. The Panzer IVs with their AP shells do not fare any better. Damn it, that must be a giant. Driver, close up to 500 meters. For now, cease fire. I transmit the same order to the rest of my platoon, as it doesn't make sense to engage those beasts at this range. For my turret, I shout over to Werner Vielbaum of 7th Company, Tank 731, so he orders his men to cease fire as well. We can't advance any further as we have to fuel up first. After driving cross-country the whole time, now is the time to stop. Damn, there are even more of the big brutes. And now the brothers are pulling back. If we can't catch up with them today, we'll have to engage them again tomorrow, when they will be refueled and resupplied with ammunition. Better to finish them now, I think. But they are running. It is quite unbelievable these super modern chariots turn their tails from our Skoda Super Sports. Yesterday, they just crushed our first Abteilung under their tracks, and now they are running. It can't be clearer than this. It is not better weapons that decide victory. Again and again, it is the all-conquering and never-tiring will of each and every member of our company. Whether we like it or not, we have to form a hedgehog position, the company of riflemen between us. And then the lorries with fuel and ammunition have to be brought forward. In the meantime, the Russian is disappearing. He did, however, pump a lot of fire towards us while we were doing so. Oberfeldwebel Oswald got a 7.6 cm shell through one of his mudguards, and one of his track support rollers was ripped off. Lieutenant Schöner has been wounded in the hip and in the hand. A Kübel drove him down to Rasenjal, from where an aeroplane will fly him back to the Reich. Through my partially closed turret hatch, I can watch Obergefreiter Vossbein repairing the track of his tank. His crew has dismounted as well, and we are assisting them. They are doing that even though bullets keep swishing around. Vossbein and his commander Feldwebel Aures are not bothered. Soon they have fixed the track, and now they are reversing the tank slightly. Ducked low, like an Indian on the warpath, Aures is marshalling his tank back to the road with hand signals. Soon the fire weakens. The houses and barns 600 to 700 meters ahead of us have gone up in flames. Russian riflemen had taken position there and had opened a flanking fire on us from the half right. The fires have chased them away. The flames of the burning Christie tank on our hill and the burning buildings on the other side form a wild picture. The red artillery, probably self-propelled guns, are still firing upon us. An 8.8 centimeter flak battery sets up its guns behind us and sends some well-aimed greetings across to the disappearing Soviet tanks. The chaps manning the 88s are held in high esteem among us. Lieutenant Löde is one of the gun commanders. Numerous kills are marked as rings on its barrel. The riflemen dig in. Lieutenant Langenbruch and I secure the road while 7th Company takes up position on Hill 122. All remaining tanks have been withdrawn to make them invisible to those on the other side. The boss supplies me with a large cup of hot bean coffee, and together with the riflemen I start organizing the defense for a potential night attack. There is little sleep for me during the night, but I don't believe that the Russian will come again. And he didn't come. He retreated. At dawn, the Nebelwerfer-Abteilung, which had been attached to us with revolver-barreled launchers, fired a few salvos of its rocket-propelled shells over to the Russians. The Lancers on our hill cheered them on with astonished faces. Our corps artillery also plastered the Dubiza crossing with 15 centimeter shells, and our 7.5s joined the concert quite nicely. For us, that was a nice and soothing feeling. To cover their withdrawal, the Russians fired on us as well. But that withdrawal could just as well be an assembly for another attack. As such, I watched the proceedings like a hawk. On the next morning, June the 25th, the Russians scored a few very nice hits with their artillery. The observation apparatus and the range-finding platoon of the rocket launcher battery snuffed it, as did some artillery observers. The commanders were nowhere to be seen. It was then that our boss and the leader of the riflemen on our hill decided to capture the Dubiza crossing themselves. If we really had to wait, then we could do it just as well in an all-around defensive position there. During the night, the commander of the riflemen had sent 2 reconnaissance patrols down to the river, and they had reported weak enemy resistance and the withdrawal of most Russian troops. The advance, which our 2 companies now conducted autonomously, led past the wrecks of armored cars, lorries and guns. A hollow way led to the river and the still entirely undamaged concrete bridge. On the other side, a huge Russian tank had become stuck in a ditch. It had been abandoned and was entirely undamaged. We crossed without being challenged and deployed for all-around defense on the other side of the Dubiza. Then the 7th Company pulled past us and we were to lead them forward. I was so tired that I could easily have fallen out of the turret, and it was difficult to keep one's eyes open anyway because of the terror, ever-present dust.
And the action is ramping up nicely. There are some more fatalities, and we get an interesting insight into the opinion of our protagonist about the awkward-looking KV-2 heavy assault tank. Imagine going up against a beast like that in a tiny 9.5-ton light tank, even though the KV-2 was notoriously bad in its combat effectiveness. The author also talks about engaging a so-called Christie tank. He's probably talking about the BT-5 tank, which was a light tank that had a drive system designed by American engineer J. Walter Christie and was adopted, in air quotes, by the Russians. It's special because he could remove the tracks and drive entirely on the rubber road wheels with relatively high speed. But they were light tanks, so they could easily be defeated. We also learn about how crews got out of their tanks during the action to fix their vehicles under fire. Quite impressive. We're still in June 1941, so the Russian winter is far away, but we'll get there soon. I will see you then. Cheers.